What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? In this video we're going to be going over how to create a queue in Python. Let's get started. So what is a queue? A queue is a data structure that stores items in a first in first out manner, usually referred to as a FIFO data structure. First in first out. So like a line, to remove an item it is taken from the front. So as you guys can see from the little picture on the bottom right, you see 6 people. And just like if you were to go to your favorite store, you would hope that the first person in that line gets taken some service, like they're given some service first, and not the last person that entered the line. So that's what a queue is. It's the first person gets served first, or in this case the first item gets removed first. So whoever gets in the line first gets removed from the line first. That is a queue. Now let's start the code implementation for a queue. Alright, cool. So now it's time to create a queue. I have my VS Code open. It doesn't matter what editor you use, it can be whatever. But just open it up, create a Py file, and let's get started. So I'm going to create a class called queue, and we're going to start defining the methods needed for a queue. But first, we're going to initialize the actual list that's going to hold all the information in the queue. So we're just going to define this init, open that up, and let's create a instance of a queue, and we're just going to make that an empty list, and we should be ready to start defining the methods. So the first method that is needed for a queue is enqueue, and let me just spell that out. Let me give that a space. So it's def enqueue, and what an enqueue means in the queue is that we're going to enter a value into the queue. All right. So we have our list here. So we're going to enter a value into this list. And a way that I remember that is just remember this prefix n, like enter and queue. We're going to enter a value into the queue. So let's just define the parameters. It's just going to be a value. The value that first is the instance that of self, and then the value that we want to enter into the queue. So just like a line, we're just gonna take the queue, which is the list, and if a person comes, then we're just gonna append that value onto the queue. So that's gonna be entered at the end. So just like it's gonna be 1, then it's gonna be 2, and then it's gonna be the new value that we just passed. So and vice versa. Even if it's the first item, it'll just be the new value. So that's enqueue, and that's pretty easy. So the next one is going to be dequeue. All right. So now you see the pattern. Dequeue pretty much means we're gonna remove a value from the queue. We're gonna you can either say decrement or deletes a value from the queue. Just remember the prefix n for enter, and d, it could be delete, it could be decrement, however it helps you remember. But just know that dequeue means we're gonna take a value from the beginning of the queue. Or if it's one item in the queue, then it's just gonna be that one item that we remove from the queue. So that's gonna be just a parameter of self, and then we're gonna check if there's actually a value, or if there's already values in the queue to actually remove. Because if there's no values in the queue, there's nothing to remove. All right, because there's no values, so we have to do a check to see if there's anything inside of the queue. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna have a if check, and I'm gonna do self dot queue, and if its length is greater than 0, then we can return self dot queue, and we're gonna pop. And by default, pop is if we don't define a parameter, it's gonna take the last value in the queue, and that's not what a queue is. If we're using a queue, then we have to remove the first item. So we're gonna use 0 as the index because it's a queue. We want to take out the first value in the queue. Now if there's no values in the queue, then we're going to return -1. And then, so we defined a method for entering a value into the queue and deleting or removing a value from the queue. So now we're gonna create another method called front, and just like the name implies, it's just gonna take the front value of the queue. And just like with that queue, I actually want to check if there's actually a value in the queue, because if there's not, then there's nothing to see at the front. There's no values. But in this case, we're going to check if the length of the queue is greater than 0, and if there is, then we're going to return self.queue, and we're going to return the first index, because we want the front of this queue. We want the first item in the queue. And if not, then we're just going to return -1. And this can be, we can define whatever. It could be a string or whatever, but pretty much we're just letting the user know that there's no values currently in the queue to check for, or to, in this case, to check for in the front, or in the dead queue case to remove. Like, so it can be any value that will help us let the user know that there is no value to remove or to check for. You can even throw an error here if that helps. But in this case, I'm just returning -1. And if the user sees -1, that means, okay, there's no value to check for or to remove in the queue. So then there's going to be the rear method, which returns the last value in the queue. So let's do that. Self. And then we're just gonna copy, or we're just gonna paste that check to see if the length is greater than 0, and then return the last value. Then if there's nothing if there's nothing at the end, then return -1. And this line right here is just gonna take the list, and this -1 as the index just implies, or just let Python know that, okay, this -1 let Python know that we want to take the last value in the list, the end value in the list, if there is a value inside the queue. So the last value in this queue will be returned back to the user, and if not, then it's going to return a -1. And now we're just going to define a helper method, which is just going to print out everything that's in the queue, just so that we can visualize what is going on. So we're just going to print out the queue, and we're going to just define an instance of self, and then if we're just going to paste this check again, and if it's greater than 0, then we're just going to run a little for loop for each item in the self.queue, and we're going to print that out. We're going to print an item and make sure that there's a space in between each one. And then if there's nothing inside, then we're just going to print out it's an empty queue. So we are good to go. There's, we created this queue class. Initially we created this empty list for the queue, and then we're going to append the value. To enter a value into the queue, we append the value to the end. But to remove a value from the queue, just by how a queue functions, we're going to pop the first value of the queue if there's any values in the queue. And if there's no values in the queue, then we're going to return -1. Then we have another method called front. If there is values in the queue, then we're going to return the frontmost value in this queue. So we're just going to return the first index, which is the first value in the queue. And if not, then we're going to return -1. And then we have the rear method, which gets the last value in the queue, and we just provide the index of -1 because of Python behavior is that if we use the -1 index, then it's going to return the last value. And just to check, we have a print, and this will just iterate through each item in the queue and print out each item. and this is just to help out. But usually, you'll probably deck queue through each one and print that out. But just to help out, I just created a printer for that queue. So let's run it. Clear that out, and then create an instance of a queue. And then we're gonna do q.enqueue. Remember, enqueue, enter a value, and we're just gonna take a couple of these. So let's do 4. Let's do, well, yeah, it's already 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then let's do a queue dot dequeue, and we don't have to specify anything here. It just lets the queue know that we want to just remove the frontmost value in the queue. And then we're just gonna take a peek at the front, and let's print that out. Actually, print queue dot front and print out queue dot rear, just to see what's at the end. And let's do queue, and we're just gonna print out all of it. Actually, let's just remove out one more. Actually, no, let's enter one more. Let's enter like a random 50, and then we'll print it out and save that. And let's do, so boom. If I can just print out an empty line just to make sure that it's, and open this up a little bit more so it can be seen. So just do a Python 3 q.py, and then you'll see first we're gonna, obviously we entered 1, 2, 3, and 4. We dequeued the first value, so then when we check the front, now we'll see 2, and when we check the rear, which is the end value, you're gonna see 4. And then we're gonna enter or enqueue a value of 50, and then we're gonna print out the queue, and now we see 2, 3, 4, and 50. And let's check out one more behavior. If we just pop out like 4 times, just to empty the queue out, and we print out this queue, and let's see if we actually get to that. Boom. So we print it out after we add 50, and then we just remove everything from the queue, and now we're seeing, okay, this is an empty queue after we popped out, or after we dequeued everything. So that's the queue. So if you want something that's gonna go in order and be removed in order, a queue is perfect. And one example I can think of is if you have like a messaging system, or if you have like when you try to get into tree traversals, you can do bare first search. So there's different cases that you can use the queue data structure, and as you start to dive more into it, it becomes more and more important. So that is how you create a queue, and that's how you take advantage of it. And you don't have to create this this whole object yourself. There are libraries for it. The collection library has dequeue, which you're able to make a queue and a stack. But it's good to know how it's running in the back end on a very simple case like this. So yeah, that's how you create a queue.